They sold over 100 million records worldwide. They headlined Madison Square Garden. They performed behind the Iron Curtain when Western rock was still forbidden. Rock You Like a Hurricane became a sports anthem that defined a generation. Wind of Change soundtracked the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then the world moved on. Grunge killed their radio dominance. Album sales collapsed. The farewell tour was announced, then canceled, then announced again. Decades later, they're still touring, but to crowds who remember the glory, not live it. The band that once conquered the planet now plays legacy festivals, watching younger acts claim the stages they built. This is the story of how a German hard rock band became global icons, then watched the culture shift beneath their feet. A tale of ambition, endurance, and the cruel reality that every peak has a descent. But to understand the decline, we have to go back to Hanover, West Germany, 1965. Hanover in the mid-1960s wasn't a rock and roll paradise. It was a gray, working-class industrial city still recovering from the war. Kids didn't dream of stadiums, they dreamed of escape. Rock music was an art. It was the only language loud enough to drown out the past. Rudolf Schenker was 17 years old when he founded Scorpions. He wasn't a prodigy. He was a kid with a guitar, ambition, and a refusal to accept the life laid out for him. The early Scorpions played German clubs, grinding through covers in smoky bars where nobody cared about their names. They sang in German because that's all they knew. The dream was survival, not superstardom. But Rudolf understood something crucial. If they stayed local, they'd die local. German rock didn't sell internationally. So Scorpions made a decision that would define their trajectory. They switched to English. Clumsy at first, heavily accented, but committed. This wasn't about authenticity. It was about access. In 1969, Klaus Meine joined as lead vocalist. His voice was raw, powerful, and instantly recognizable, part growl, part wail, all emotion. He became the voice of Scorpions, the sound that would carry them from German dive bars to arenas worldwide. Rudolf's younger brother, Michael Schenker, joined as lead guitarist. Even as a teenager, Michael was a virtuoso, fast, melodic, technically brilliant. His playing gave Scorpions a weapon other German bands didn't have: legitimacy. Critics could dismiss them as provincial upstarts, but they couldn't dismiss Michael's guitar work. What made them different was simple: they were German, singing in English, playing hard rock with classical European sensibilities. Not British blues rock. Not American swagger. Something hybrid. They fused heavy riffs with melodic hooks, aggression with beauty. Fans who were tired of the same British invasion sound found something fresh. Critics didn't know what to do with them. Their debut album, Lonesome Crow, dropped in 1972. It was underground, raw, and largely ignored outside Germany. But it planted a flag. Scorpions existed. They had a sound. They had ambition. Then Michael Schenker left to join UFO, a British band with better prospects. The departure was a gut punch. Scorpions had lost their lead guitarist, their virtuoso, their edge. Rudolf could have folded. Instead, he rebuilt. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already there. Scorpions weren't a collective democracy, they were Rudolf's vision. His band. His name. His drive. Klaus sang. Michael played. But Rudolf steered. That structure worked when everyone was hungry. Later, when egos grew and exhaustion set in, it would become a cage. Uli Jon Roth replaced Michael Schenker in 1973, and the band's sound transformed. Roth wasn't just fast, he was experimental, pushing Scorpions toward neoclassical metal, psychedelic textures, and improvisational jams. Albums like Fly to the Rainbow and In Trance built a cult following across Europe. Scorpions weren't pop stars yet, but they were becoming respected. But beneath this progress, tension simmered. Uli's vision was artistic, exploratory. Rudolph wanted anthems. Klaus wanted commercial success. The label wanted hits. 3 different futures, one band name. Their live reputation exploded in the 1970s. Scorpions became known as a ferocious touring act, tight, aggressive, relentless. They conquered Japan before they touched America, building fan bases in markets the British and American acts ignored. Smart strategy. Patient ambition. Virgin Killer dropped in 1976 and sparked international controversy due to its album artwork. The outrage got them banned in multiple countries and gave them more visibility than any radio play could. Scorpions learned a hard lesson. Controversy sells. What fans didn't see was the exhaustion building. Touring nonstop across Europe and Asia meant months away from home, cramped vans, bad food, and constant pressure to deliver. The music was thriving, but the men playing it were wearing thin. In 1978, Uli Jon Roth walked away due to creative differences. He wanted progressive experimentation. Rudolph wanted stadium rock. The split was inevitable. Matthias Jabs replaced Roth in 1979, and everything changed. Jabs wasn't a virtuoso like Michael or an experimentalist like Uli. He was a craftsman, precise, anthem-ready, built for arenas. His arrival shifted Scorpions from underground credibility to mainstream dominance. Love Drive, released in 1979, was the breakthrough. Loving You Sunday Morning hit American FM radio. Suddenly, Scorpions weren't just a European curiosity, they were a global threat. And that's where the trouble truly began. Success brought money, media attention, and pressure to repeat the formula. The band that once played for survival now had label executives, managers, and publicists dictating creative direction. The freedom that fueled their early work was evaporating. They were becoming a brand. The early 1980s were Scorpions' imperial phase. Animal Magnetism dropped in 1980, darker and heavier, and its controversial album cover sparked debates that only amplified sales. Scorpions had mastered the art of outrage as marketing. Then came the crisis. Before recording Blackout in 1982, Klaus Meine lost his voice. Not strained, but doctors told him he might never sing again. Surgery was risky. Recovery uncertain. For months, the future of Scorpions hung in silence. Klaus underwent vocal surgery and brutal rehabilitation. Slowly, painfully, his voice returned. When Blackout was finally released, it wasn't just an album, it was a resurrection. No One Like You became an anthem, a defiant middle finger to everyone who thought they were finished. The album reached the top 10 in multiple countries. Scorpions had survived their darkest moment and emerged stronger. But that moment of triumph was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable, selling out arenas, dominating rock radio, touring every continent, the cracks off stage were spreading. The relentless touring schedule was inhuman. Band members were aging. The pressure to top each album was suffocating. And the music industry was changing in ways they didn't yet understand. Love at First Sting arrived in 1984 and cemented global superstardom. Rock You Like a Hurricane became one of the defining rock anthems of the decade, raw, catchy, iconic. It's still used in sports arenas, commercials, and movies. Scorpions had achieved what few European bands ever do. They conquered America. Worldwide Live in 1985 captured their peak performance era, a document of a band at absolute maximum power. They toured alongside the biggest names in rock. They sold out Madison Square Garden multiple times. They were untouchable. Then came their most unexpected triumph. In 1989, Scorpions became one of the first Western rock bands to tour the Soviet Union, performing at the Moscow Music Peace Festival alongside Bon Jovi, Ozzy Osbourne, and Motley Crue. They weren't just rock stars, they were cultural ambassadors during the twilight of the Cold War. And from that experience came Wind of Change. Wind of Change was inspired by the political upheaval reshaping Europe. The song referenced Gorky Park in Moscow. Its melody was simple, haunting, universal. When it was released, it became one of the best-selling singles of all time, reaching #1 in multiple countries. It wasn't just a hit, it was a historical artifact, soundtracking the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. Scorpions suddenly transcended hard rock. They were mainstream. They were a peace anthem band. They were on pop radio, adult contemporary stations, played at political events. Their audience expanded beyond metalheads to include people who'd never owned a rock album. But this was the trap. Wind of Change redefined Scorpions in the public mind. They were no longer the dangerous, controversial band with edgy album covers. They were the band that sang about hope and change. Some fans felt betrayed. Critics accused them of selling out. The identity that made them dangerous was being replaced by something safer, softer. And then the 1990s arrived, and the entire foundation of rock music shifted beneath them. Grunge exploded. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Roth, anti-commercial, anti-stadium. Everything Scorpions represented, arena anthems, polished production, theatrical performances, was suddenly uncool. MTV stopped playing their videos. Rock radio moved on. The kids who once worshipped Rock You Like a Hurricane were now moshing to Smells Like Teen Spirit. Face the Heat dropped in 1993 and performed respectably, but the dominance was gone. Pure Instinct followed in 1996, leaning heavily into ballads, chasing the adult contemporary audience that Wind of Change had opened. You and I became a modest hit in Europe, but it felt like a band grasping for relevance. Album sales declined steadily. The tours got smaller. The media stopped calling. Scorpions were still talented, still professional, but the culture had moved on. They were legacy artists now, not innovators. The lowest moment wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was watching younger bands fill the arenas they built, seeing their music relegated to classic rock stations, realizing that new fans didn't discover them through current hits but through their parents' record collections. In 1995, drummer Herman Rarebell left the band, another crack in the foundation. Lineup changes had always happened, but this felt different. The original core was fragmenting not from creative disputes but from exhaustion. Decades of touring, recording, promoting, it grinds you down. The immediate consequences were clear. Scorpions could no longer dictate culture. They could tour profitably, especially in Europe and Latin America where their legacy remained strong. But they couldn't break new ground. They couldn't compete with the musical revolution happening around them. The trust between the band and the zeitgeist was shattered. Scorpions entered the 2000s as a legacy touring act. They released albums, some experimental, some nostalgic, all with mixed reception. The fanbase remained loyal but aging. New converts were rare. In 2010, Scorpions announced a farewell tour. It felt like closure. After 5 decades, they were finally stepping away with dignity. The tour sold well. Fans came to say goodbye. Emotional shows. Standing ovations. A proper ending. Then they reversed the decision. The retirement was cancelled. They kept touring. The farewell became a false resolution. But the story wasn't over. Because while Scorpions continued, the industry had fundamentally changed. Streaming replaced album sales. Festival slots replaced arena tours. The business model that built their empire no longer existed. They adapted by becoming heritage act headliners, nostalgia, not innovation. Decades later, the battle became about legacy. Who remembers them? How are they remembered? As pioneers or relics? As the band that broke barriers or the band that couldn't let go? Scorpions released Rock Believer in 2022, marketed as a return to their classic sound. Reviews were solid but not enthusiastic. It charted modestly. The album wasn't bad, it was irrelevant. The cultural conversation had moved on. Klaus Mein's voice, once unstoppable, now shows where. He can still deliver, but the stamina isn't there. Set lists are adjusted. Shows are shorter. Physical limitations dictate what was once limitless. Rudolf Schenker, now in his 70s, remains the driving force. Matthias Jabs still plays lead guitar with precision. They're professionals. But the fire, the hunger that drove them from Hanover to Moscow, has been replaced by routine. The stakes are existential. Do they keep touring until they physically can't? Do they risk one more album that nobody asks for? Do they finally retire? Or does retirement mean admitting the dream is over? The legacy war isn't legal, it's emotional. Scorpions didn't lose their name or their rights. They lost their cultural dominance. And that loss is irreversible. Today, Scorpions tour worldwide, playing festivals and theaters to audiences who know every word of Rock You Like a Hurricane and Wind of Change. They're beloved in Latin America, still massive in Germany, respected globally. Their catalog generates steady licensing revenue. They're in commercials, soundtracks, sports highlights. But they no longer shape culture. They reflect it. The band that once made history now commemorates it. Former members have scattered. Herman Rarebell retired. Michael Schenker pursued a solo career and became a guitar legend in his own right. Uli Jon Roth is revered in progressive metal circles. They built their own legacies outside the Scorpions brand. Scorpions' influence is undeniable. They proved a German band could dominate global rock. They bridged European classical sensibilities and American arena rock. They survived political upheaval, industry collapse, and shifting tastes. They outlasted grunge, nu metal, and every trend that tried to bury classic rock. But survival isn't the same as triumph. Success created legends, but it also created the expectation of eternal relevance. And that's the cruelest trap of all. The system that elevated Scorpions, MTV, album sales, arena tours, no longer exists. The audience that made them icons is aging. The next generation streams their hits but doesn't buy tickets. And the band, unwilling or unable to stop, keeps playing. The meaning is clear. Ambition built an empire, but time dismantles everything. Scorpions climbed higher than any German rock band before or since. And the fall wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, inevitable, human. There's talk of one more album. Rumors of a true final tour. But those rumors have circulated for years. The truth is, endings are hard. Especially when the beginning was so glorious. So what part of this story hits you most? Is it the triumph of Rock You Like a Hurricane, when a band from Hanover conquered the world? Is it Wind of Change, the moment they transcended rock and became history? Or is it watching them now, still touring into their 70s, chasing the ghost of what they were? Did you see them live in the 80s, when they were unstoppable? Or did you discover them later, through classic rock playlists and sports highlight reels? Drop your thoughts below. Tell us your Scorpions memory. And if you want more stories about the bands that changed music, and the forces that time always wins against, hit subscribe. Because every empire falls. Scorpions just fought harder and longer than most.